Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of the Decloaked podcast. And my guest today is Gill, Global Head of Cybersecurity at Bionical Emas. Have I pronounced that right, Max?
You have, yeah, perfect.
And also your surname, is it Gill or Gill?
Gill.
Gill, good, we're in there. So for those who don't know, me and Max are acquainted. We've actually got introduced at various different C-Vision international events, and we've become friends over the past year. And it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you, Max. And again, thanks for your time for joining the podcast. And we're going to jump right into it then in terms of a brief overview of who you are and your career.
Great. First of all, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be on the show. And yeah, big fan. So yeah, happy to be on. So myself, I guess a brief overview. I've been in the IT industry for about 14 years now. Been working in cyber probably for the last 10 from when I first got introduced to it. And now coming up to 5 years with my current employer, which is Bionical Emas, where, as you said, I'm the global head of cybersecurity.
And I think 5 years is a long stint in any company. I think as many different cyber leaders or cyber managers, they tend to have a kind of shelf life of a year, 18 months. And I'm interested, Max, what's the appeal at your company? Looking obviously at your history, you've went through various different roles. Just kind of talk me through that journey. And then, yeah, and also if you want to talk about, any kind of career highlights as well.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if we start with where I came from before Bionical, so I had various different IT roles within different companies and different industries. I think the one where I kind of really got to learn quite a bit was I worked at Leicester City Council. So I kind of got in there as just as a security analyst initially. Went in. It was I would say it's a big organization. They got many buildings, many staff. I had the opportunity to learn from some very skilled people there. The challenge that they always faced over there was, and it's probably the same with any kind of public company in that public industry, the public sector even, is there's always budget issues. There's always problems with what you can spend, what you can bring in, and that could be anything from staff and salary. So that kind of affects the talent that you can bring in, but then also the products that you can use, the services that you can use. It all kind of ties in. So they were always almost working with their hands tied behind their back a little bit, but they were doing a great job. So they taught me a few fundamental things I think that I needed to know at that time. And they were great for me to kind of understand. And then I think what happened was partway through my stint there, so I think I was there about 4 years, I kind of got more and more responsibility. And then I kind of got chucked in the deep end a little bit, where I got thrown into the education side of Leicester City Council, because they have a couple of colleges that they look after. So I got put in there and I was asked to look after a couple of buildings on my own pretty much. And I went in there not knowing what to expect. And when I went in there, I quickly realized the corporate side of the council is very different to the education side of the council. They have even less to work with. And they do obviously want to try and make things secure for the students. But I found that a lot of things were open or not secure or not the way they should be. And trying to drive that change and get things to a standard that they should be at was definitely a challenge. I won't go through all the things that I had to do and the people I had to speak with to be able to get things done, but I was a little bit worried at the time that at any point it's almost like pulling the pin out of the grenade. It could just explode in here and there could be big problems. Because I was the only person working these 2-3 buildings, even though I'd inherited all of this, I was like, it's going to come down on me, regardless of whether I've been here a week or I've been here a year. So yeah, there was a bit of a battle to get that place kind of secured, but it worked out fine in the end. And then as I got more and more confident, took on more responsibility, took on more opportunities within the council, I then started looking further afield. Managed to get an opportunity with Bionical Emas. So I came in there. they're a pharmaceutical company, vastly different. So when we talk about budgets and we talk about what you can do, what you can bring in, and what you can play with and the talent that you can work with, it's night and day. So when you go into the pharmaceutical industry, they have budget that you can use. They allow you to use the best in breed in terms of the tech stack. And you can, as long as you've got a reason and it's justifiable and there's a business case, you can use some of the best equipment around, you can use some of the best technology, and you can work with people that know what they're doing. So going into that environment was very, very different. Having said that, when I did come in, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the challenges, there was things that needed to be addressed. And again, that was a bit of a journey from where we were on day one to where we are now.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of a career, I think it's been probably the standard trajectory of where you start, even before the counselling, like an IT support role, based on going into IT and doing, like the comp tier and doing your BTEC in IT and all that. And the first role is going to be a support role. The trajectory has been from that to going into more generalized IT and then kind of specializing into cyber once getting introduced to it and having like a really big interest in it. And then it's kind of just spiraled from there, really.
And, it sounds like a traditional approach in terms of you just said, your career trajectory. And, is there any hints and tips you would offer anyone that's, breaking into the industry or maybe starting in their first role?
Yeah, I would say from when I started, which feels like such a long time ago now, I think it is vastly different to getting into cyber now to what it was when I started in it. I think now you almost have to have a bit of a persona, let's say maybe on Twitter, for example, or on LinkedIn or something. You need to have something where you're kind of showing a little bit of what you're maybe not what you're doing, so you're not in the industry trying to get in, but maybe what you're learning, or maybe putting in a little like project portfolio, something you're doing in your own time. I think you need to, because I think there's a lot of people that have been trying to get into the industry. Having said that, which is a bit of a contradiction, we've got a massive gap. There's like a skills shortage. There's not enough people in the industry, and that's often talked about. In terms of when I got in, because I'd got into a role where there was opportunity to learn and grow. This was a scientifics group. This was a company called Environmental Scientifics, which I don't know if they've bought out or if they just closed down, but they don't no longer exist. But when I was with them, there was a chance for me to learn various different skill sets, and I just happened to, out of all the different options I was given a chance to learn and have a look at, cyber was the one that I liked the most. I did spend a few days in infrastructure as well. But there was just something about cyber that made me kind of gravitate that way. And that was obviously early on because cyber wasn't what it is now. It was different back then. But yeah, it interested me. So I kind of just went that way. And yeah, the guy in charge at the time took me under his wing, taught me a few things, like I say, and it wasn't a lot, but it was just enough to kind of understand some of the basics. And I would say in terms of tips, the main thing you want to do is get your fundamentals clear. So learn the basics, learn the fundamentals, get yourself a foundation. If you can do that, you can then say, right, this is what I'm going to build on. And there's various different courses you could do. If you can't get any hands-on experience, if you're not already in the IT industry, or you can't kind of just, because if you was in IT support, I would say go sit with the cyber department in your own time and just say, can I just sit there and learn and take in everything that you can? But if you're not already in an IT job and you want to get in, and you're saying, I don't just want to get into IT, I want to get into cyber, I would say take on some courses. So some of the basic foundation courses like ISC Squared offer certification in cyber. I'd say learn that, get the basic skills out of that. There's other ones. There's CompTIA, do a Security Plus. You could also take that on and learn that. But I'd say if you're not already in the industry, it's probably best to try and get like a basic course under your belt and then grow from there. But if you're in the industry, if you're in IT, you've got a security department that's close by that you can get access to in your lunch times or after work or something, I would say go and sit with them and just see what you can learn.
I love it. And I think sometimes it's so obvious that people probably don't think about it, or maybe, they're introverted, they're shy, we're not all animals in security. We actually, I think we have a really good community, and we're always open, and we really want people to learn because, selfishly, we're thinking that's an extra set of eyes and ears, or even an extra pair of hands that can help us. And, like I've seen so many people that have did that have maybe done it in their spare time, lunch break, or they've went and researched something and they need a bit more clarity. So they'll just, you know, spend that time with people to understand, the kind of to move beyond the fundamentals. So yeah, excellent advice. And while we're obviously talking about the kind of different aspects of the career and pivots, so obviously my next question for you, Max, would be the challenges that you've faced in the industry. So they can be personal, they can be professional. It's entirely up to you. So give me some of the challenges that you faced in the industry.
So I'd say the one that stands out for me was when I joined Bionical Emas. When I came in, there was I guess, a transition period, and the existing IT team, security team, they were all leaving, and we were going to be pretty much a brand new team. Luckily for me, the guy who was the head of security at the time was still going to be there for the next like 6 weeks. So I kind of got to pick his brains a little bit, understand what's kind of been done, what's already there in place and what's not. And if I was to sum it up, uh, actually, not even if I sum it up, so my boss, who also came in at a similar time, he when me and him spoke about what was actually happening in Bionicle Emas, he has two analogies. One is about an onion and how security is like an onion and you have various layers. The other one that he always goes back to even now, like 5 years later, is when we walked into that place, because they had some good stuff in place, but a lot of where I said the basics and the fundamentals, they weren't there. So he kind of labeled it as it's like a prison. It's like one of the best prisons you can see. You've got all the CCTV footage and everything there, but your doors and your windows haven't got any bars.
Yeah.
It's like there was just things that were glaring. That was just like, well, that's the basic stuff, but you've got the advanced stuff, which is fine, but you need to have the basics first.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, you've got like an IDS in place, you've got IPO, you've got Darktrace in place, but then you haven't got something as basic as an audit log for when someone signs into a cloud environment, or you haven't got your door system set up correctly so everybody can access the same door. Just all those kind of things. We were like, right, let's get all of this kind of set. So we put all of that in place. We then went after something to kind of show that, look, this is what we're doing. So we then gone and got Cyber Essentials to kind of certify that, look, we've got these kind of things in place. And you can see that we've kind of taken it from where it was on day one to where it is now. It's night and day. And so, yeah, it's been a success, but it definitely was a challenge to kind of go from we're here, we want to be here. How do we get there in the shortest amount of time possible, but without rushing it? You don't want to, just make a mess either.
Yeah, and I think quite often, when obviously the decks have been cleared or there's a refresh when it comes to security functions, I think some people just want to do everything 100 miles per hour and they don't realise that, you need a good communication strategy. You need people on side. It needs to be about them. You need to kind of look at, even in some places, they'll have a bar raiser mentality in other areas of the company, and they're so focused on being excellent at what they do, they forget about everyone else in the company, and that then in turn creates a huge issue for everyone else. But yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
And I think the other thing that was a challenge there as well was the culture. The way that security specifically was viewed wasn't great.
yeah,
So I mean, IT in general is a thankless job. It doesn't really matter what your IT department does. No one's ever going to be like, oh, they're doing an amazing job or well done because of you, we've done X, Y, and Z. It's always if something's broken, they're going to go to your IT help desk, or they're going to go to even your IT managers and just be like, this is a problem. So
yeah,
it's thankless. But in terms of security, it's almost like a separate division. And I think the previous regime maybe didn't leave the best kind of taste for them at that time.
yeah,
And I don't think it's anything they were doing wrong. I think it's just the way that they had set up the culture at the time was they almost found security as a bit of a blocker.
yeah,
And I think also perhaps because it was a bit of I would say a small to medium sized business. So everybody knew each other. It was a bit of a close knit culture at that time. It's grown a lot since then. But at that time, it was quite a close knit culture. I think you had people that maybe would, let's say, just, and this is before COVID, so everyone's in the offices at the time. People would leave their desktops unlocked and walk off. You'd have members of the security team coming by and maybe leaving post-it notes on the desktops, and saying, you've left this unlocked, or saying, we're going to report this to your line manager, or whatever it might be. As something as simple as just leaving your desk unlocked. I think a lot of users kind of took that as just somebody being a busybody kind of thing, but not understanding why they were doing it. So we kind of have to change the way they were viewed. Even the security awareness training, it was for everybody. I think this is probably in a lot of enterprises anyway, but for everyone, they found just security awareness training was just a hassle that they didn't want to have. And I think they were doing it every single month, and probably not as much focus on the quality of the content, more of the let's just get as much in as we can kind of thing. So to turn that culture around, we had to kind of change the way we were doing things. We weren't going to go around and start putting post notes on people's desktops as well. It's not really going to achieve anything. So it was more a kind of like, we can have like an open talk. So if anyone wants to come talk about security, we can have a set time in a month where we can go and talk about that. And if you don't want to talk about that, that's fine. In terms of security awareness training, we kind of reduced it down to quarterly, but we changed it to the point where it was topics of interest, and stuff that people might be like, oh, actually, I want to have a look at that, because it kind of might affect their personal life. So, for example, if we're saying how your social media might get hacked, and someone might be like, oh, yeah, how would that get hacked? And then kind of in the training go through it, and they'll be like, but your work account can also get hacked in a very similar way.
Yeah.
So kind of bringing things in like that, I think, definitely helped change the culture and the environment. And the way security is viewed now is very, very different.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. You're making it about the end user. You're making it personal to them, so they understand why certain changes. And also, it's not 1990. You're not going to
Yeah.
run with post-it notes like that. That kind of, those days are gone. And I think something that resonated with me was you were saying that IT teams or working in IT related functions is seen as a thankless task. And what do you think needs to change then within a respective IT industry, or within security as well? Because it seems like it's always an issue. Everyone that I ever speak with, it's always like you never get any praise or thanks. But when you tell an organization or the business that without an IT function or security function, the whole thing falls apart, they seem to forget that that's the kind of bedrock, or the backbone of the running of a company, or protecting the organization, to allow it to grow, to allow it to take risks, to allow it to expand. And my kind of point of view on it is, maybe it's just bad PR. Maybe you just need to work with your internal marketing team or comms team, work with your HR functions and ask them for help. Say, like, what's your feedback? Because obviously they're going to be more sensitive to things going on in our organization. So that's something that, as a strategy that, I'm quite open to deploying. I'm interested to get your point of view. What do you think needs to change in order to change that perspective, that perception? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're right, and I agree with you in terms of, like you say, like maybe HR or somebody can help. But I think back office functions understand other back office functions.
Yeah.
I think if you're in an environment where it's very heavily, let's say, sales focused, for example, they're probably the ones that the rest of the business understands more, because they're the guys that are bringing in the contracts or bringing in the money or helping the business stay functional. And it's very easy to see why, because they're bringing in those clients, right? But equally, if they brought all those clients in, but there was no IT function, there was no one to administer the devices or keep your network safe or your cloud environment safe, or if there was nobody to help you out when something goes wrong or a piece of hardware fails, they're not going to be able to get the job done anyway. So then the clients don't really matter. How you would like kind of put that out to them and how you would address that is difficult to say, because it's not really something enterprises or organizations think about. It's not something that is top of mind for them, because they don't really see it as something that's, I guess, important in the time. Because for most businesses, it's all about keeping the business afloat. It's about making profit. It's about keeping the organization out there. And these kind of internal things, they don't really take precedent. So it's hard to say how you address it, but I think maybe like you said, maybe HR is the way to go, or maybe other back office functions can all kind of promote each other and say, well, we're all working on this together to keep this business going. Because equally, like I've just said with IT, if you didn't have someone to help administer the devices, you can't do it. Same with HR. If there's no one there to settle payroll with finance, again, nobody's getting paid, so nobody's turning up for work. So everybody is equally important. But how you get that across, it's tough to say.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about today's sponsor, which is Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Through my experiences of using Vanta, Vanta automates compliance. It covers everything from SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and many more, saving you time and money, while helping you build customer trust. I love all the insights that it gives me, covering everything from asset management, my control failures, audit status, even vulnerabilities from other connecting systems which have been integrated into the platform. Having a centralized place for something like an ISO program has been a godsend for me. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Why Vanta? With over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora, they all use Vanta to manage risk and provide security in real time. So, my listeners can claim a special offer of $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/decloaked. That's vanta.com/decloaked. Thanks.
Yeah, I think something like a kind of ecosystem, so people understand all the different roles. It's amazing how many organizations don't understand what people do or who's responsible for something. They just kind of fumble in the dark, and I think that needs to change, because as soon as you see that, John in X department or Janice in that department or whatever it may be are actually key components to that life cycle, then I think you probably gain a bit more appreciation for them. But again, if anyone watching this has the answer or anything that's worked for them, stick it in the comments. I sound like such a YouTuber when I say that, but it's like, we need people's feedback. We need to understand what other people are doing, because ultimately it's going to help everyone in the end. And we want to change those misconceptions as well around IT and security functions, because I think it's quite unfair. And where the world's going now with automation and AI, it's like, if you don't keep up with trends, you don't keep up with who does what in an organization, you're going to get left behind, and then it becomes even more of a headache. And then these IT or back office teams become even more distant. So, but yes, I wanted to ask you, Max, the topic that you wanted effectively to discuss that needs relevance and clearing up within the industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I've had to think about this actually, and there's a couple of different routes that could have gone, but I think the most interesting one that probably isn't spoken about enough is to do with identity and access management. So I think identity access management is spoken about a fair bit, but I think one of the things that we kind of neglect is the non-human identities. So I think there is a few painful security issues associated with non-human identities. I think identity is really, really important, because we're no longer, we need to protect the perimeter. That was something that we were doing a long time ago. Now we've completely come away from that. Everybody's working remote. Most resources are in the cloud. You're not really VPNing and going into your on-premise. And there will be people that will, and there will be people that are using hybrid environments, of course. But identity is at the core of everything now. It's like identity is the new perimeter. And I think with the non-human identities, I think there is a major gap, because I don't think we're protecting them correctly. And I think they do have a lot of permissions, and a lot of them, once they're set, a lot of them are set and forget. They're not like, we put in a lot of effort and resource into protecting human identities. And we'll go through things like, when someone leaves, you're going to decommission that, and you're gonna do everything within your power to make sure somebody can't get in once they've left. But with these non-human identities, they're kind of just left a lot of the time. So I think what you get is you get credentials that are associated with applications or devices or service accounts. You've got other automated systems, and they completely outnumber the footprint of human identity. I was reading a report recently, and I can't remember what it was, on one of the security sites. It might have been on Hacker News, I can't remember. But on that report, they were saying that for every 1,000 human users, you've got organizations typically having around 10,000 non-human credentials.
Wow.
And like I said, a lot of these credentials have a lot of permissions. In some cases, you have developers, or you have engineers requesting certain permissions, and also maybe people just giving admin access because the service account needs to run X, Y, and Z on an automated process 24 hours a day or whatever it might be. But it's kind of left to its own devices. All it takes is for those accounts to the credentials to be leaked, to be cracked, whatever it might be. And once they're taken and they're shared, anything can really happen with those because they're just open. I think Kaseya, maybe, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, had a big issue with this, where they had a non-human account that was compromised. The attacker managed to move across laterally, went into basically anybody that was a Kaseya customer that had on-premise Kaseya installed, and all of those had their own admin accounts then that were connected into Kaseya, and the attackers just basically had free reign. So I do think it's a big problem, and I don't think there's any kind of real governance, and I think they exist in many enterprises, and it's among so many different tool sets. It's so vast. I think it's a very difficult topic to fix. It's hard to say how are you going to do this, but I think until we do, I think there's going to be a gap, and I think CISOs are going to find that this is our biggest vulnerability if we really look into it. It's a big pain point, and it's a struggle to find a satisfactory solution for it.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a good point about there's so much focus on human identities, not the non-human component, because what you'll find is, like for single sign-on, or let's say you have 1,000 users in your organization and you're managing that through your single sign-on provider or tool, whatever you're using. You forget that they'll have service accounts, they'll have multiple other items that are bridged and meshed together and also connect to each other. So ultimately, if one of them is compromised, that whole entire mesh that's been created with these non-human IDs and entities, well, I mean, it's a domino effect. And, I think you're right, there's no kind of answer at the moment. If anyone has any recommendations on tools or applications that can help with this, because I think it's again, list it in the comments, but I think it's a really good topic to understand that telemetry, because this is something that I'm majorly focused on analytics, in companies I've worked in. I think it's very, very important to be able to paint a picture and say, here's an entire, a map of all these entities talking to each other. What did they connect to? Where did they go? What if something falls? You've also got things like your business continuity and DR. Like if some of these services go down or they're compromised, that can impact the entirety of an organization. So, I mean, I think I'm stumped for the first time in the podcast on this topic, because it is literally it's such a head trauma that you're like, how does anyone solve it? I'm pretty sure there'll be some fancy gateway item that, can keep an eye on each of these entities, and they understand what talks to each other, and then they can isolate them if something goes crazy. But yeah, it's definitely a topic that I think will generate further conversation in the podcast. And but again,
Yeah.
how would you manage it then, if you do have any kind of insight around that?
This is the problem. I think, like, for example, you could say, do you know what? For each service account, we're only going to give it X amount of lifetime. So you say, right, this is our policy. You're only going to get, for a service account, 90 days, or you're only going to get 6 months. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get another the day before it expires. If we still need that, we're going to renew it for another 6 months or another 3 months. If we don't need that, we're going to just let it expire. Then we're going to disable that account.
Yeah.
but obviously it's a manual process, and the industry obviously at the moment doesn't really love manual processes. But I think until you get some sort of system that maybe, I don't know, maybe one of the big boys has to create something like this that kind of helps you manage this in a much better way, I think it's very, very difficult. If you think about human identities, we don't really have a plan for a lot of users of when we're going to expire. We just like when HR or line manager sends you a leave form, and then at that point, but until then, it's kind of just they're just left to be because that's the nature of the business. But in terms of non-human identity, it is really, really tricky. And I think the other thing that you get is you get a lot of, and this may come from infrastructure side of things, but you do get a lot of people who are in charge of certain systems that will be worried about if this account gets closed or gets disabled, my system's going to stop working. It's going to cause a problem for X amount of users, or it's going to stop us from generating X amount of cash or whatever it might be. There's a lot of kind of, what is the word? There's a lot of care taken over. Yeah, there is a lot of anxiety, I think, about these service accounts, and I think there's a lot of care of they've got to stay open. But the problem is if you stop using the system that account was associated with, and you just leave it open, that account's just sitting there, just waiting. I mean, even when it's in use, it's always waiting for compromise, because in a lot of cases you can't even apply MFA to them. So it is a problem. How you rectify it without a manual process, I don't know. But I think if you could even for the time being say, right, this is what we're going to do, and get some buy-in to be allowed to put in something like that and say, we're going to only have it for X amount of time, and then we'll be proactive enough to know that we've got a date that gives us an alert before that happens. Something like that might be the way forward. I think Dropbox had an issue with this as well, where they had a non-human backend account that was compromised, and that account basically had access to be able to run executables and automated services, and it kind of went crazy. I mean, they addressed it like within the 24 hours, but at that point, it was vulnerable and it did get compromised.
There you go. I think it's something that we'll probably see over the next few years, still being a major problem within the industry. But yeah, so to conclude then, Max, in terms of the one thing in cyber you think is BS and needs a focus on or needs to change, and you can rant to your heart's content on this. So yeah, over to you.
I'll try not to rant. So it's going to be a little bit contradictory as well, because I've got two different feelings on this. But I think the thing that I want to talk about, I think, is BS, is I think the pressure and the scrutiny that security leaders, heads of security, CISOs, that they get put under from, in some cases, it might be they're an enterprise. In some cases, it's outside forces. You've got obviously different agencies. You've got the SEC, who we've seen apply pressure in a very high-profile case, and going after individuals personally, which I just find for me, that's not on. I don't think that's the right way that we should be dealing with things like this. We said earlier that there's a shortage of talent within cybersecurity. The talent that we've got, it feels like in a certain way we're pushing them out a little bit. And I've spoken to a number of CISOs over the past 12 months who've basically said that the pressure or the scrutiny is so much to the point where they're getting so much thrown on their heads, and it's almost being like a scapegoat for a lot of things that probably aren't even under your control in a lot of it. It gets to the point where people either are leaving the industry or wanting to leave the industry, and that's not helpful to anybody. The SEC, for example, the Security Exchange Commission, for me, they should be the ones trying to galvanize us rather than trying to kind of break us down. So that I don't like that. I do think that there, like I said, there's pressure and scrutiny put on in various. I think any role, when you're kind of getting to the C-suite or towards that, is always going to have pressure, and there's always going to be scrutiny, and there's always going to be problems that are going to arise. And I think, obviously, without challenges and stuff, you're never going to get to where you need to go to anyway. So there is a bit of that you need. But I do think the way it's kind of put on security leaders and the way that it's pushed on security, it's not correct. I think a lot of it is they have all of the responsibility, but none of the authorization. They literally get slapped with, let's just say they get slapped with a lot of stuff that they shouldn't. And I feel like it obviously is affecting people's mental health, and that's why we're getting people that, oh, all of a sudden they get to a certain level, they get to a certain role, they're running a department, and then they're just like, this isn't good for me, I'm going to leave. Or obviously worse, like you and I have spoken about before about this, where it gets worse than that was for some people, and it's just not a good place to be. On the flip side of that, I do think that if you're going to be in security and you have a drive or a determination to get to the top, and you want to be a CISO, and you want to be in a good position, and you want to even go and work for a top tier company, if you're going to be in that position, you do need thick skin. You need to have a certain degree of mental toughness anyway. So I don't want it to be like everyone should just be like, right, that's it, woe is me, we should all just follow. That's not the way either. We should have a good degree of mental toughness, and I think you do need like stoicism. You do need to be like be able to fight your corner. But I think there comes a time where it just gets too much. There's a difference between being thick-skinned and understanding that you're in a privileged position. To be a CISO is a privileged position. Cybersecurity is a great industry to be in.
Yeah.
The amount of varied work that you and I get to do, how many days are different? We're never in the same mundane thing, right? Every day is a challenge, and sometimes there's a war, there's a battle that's going on, but it's fun to be in that. And then some days it won't be a war or a battle, but you might be able to mentor somebody, or you might be able to teach someone something. I've been in a position where I've helped someone learn some basics of cybersecurity, kind of pointed them in the right direction. 6 months later, they managed to get their first position, and that felt great because I was able to help someone. You personally, you've helped me. You've in the last year, you've taught me a few things, which have really helped me. And I think in security, the other thing you said to me was, if you ask for help, people will help you because the community is like that. And it's actually really, really true. So I think it is a privileged place to be if you can become a CISO. And I think if you can work in the cybersecurity industry in general, I think you're in a great industry. But there's the other side of that. And that's why I say there's this where I feel like I'm a bit one way and then I'm a bit the other way. I do think that there's just the outside forces and the way even perhaps some of the C-suite and some enterprises view security, it needs a change. It needs to be addressed differently. I think they need to have the same sort of authority as everybody else in that C-suite. And I think it needs to be respected a bit more as well, because at the end of the day, you get a breach or you get an issue where you're going to have the ICO come down on you, for example, and there's going to be some big fines. Security is who it comes to. So if you're not getting all of those and that's not happening, they're the ones that are trying to keep you out of that. But I think it's more than just binary. I don't think it's just you're doing a good job if you never get breached. I think we all know that it's always a matter of when, not if. Yeah. That is the way security is, because you can never have 100% security. I think if you've got a program in place where you can say, it's not that when we get breached, it's the how we respond. How do we recover? How do we get back to good? And what is our backup plan? If you've got all that in place, then why should you be the scapegoat? If you can get yourself recovered and you can get your company back to where they should be in minimal time, I don't think that we should be having all these outside forces, let's say, come down so heavily. The Uber case was another one. And I just think there just needs to be, there just needs to be a change. I think you do also see, the last thing I want to say on this is, you do see when people are going into CISO roles now, new CISO roles, they're being told in some cases to get yourself some personal liability insurance. What other job are you having to have that in? Like, to me, that's just, it's just not right.
I think I've been frantically writing on my post-it notes, here we go, evidence, but so I'll kind of, there's some items here that this was absolute gold dust, Max, hearing that kind of, that, what's the expression, a double-edged sword, of that. So, personal liability insurance for a CISO, I'm seeing a lot of that spike in the US, with US CISOs that I've spoke with, and also, people in a leadership position that are overseeing, so VP, head of. The only time I've seen why you would need liability insurance is because if you were a day rate contractor, for example, in the UK, if you had a limited company, you were getting paid X amount, you were on a 6-month contract, you need liability insurance, in case something goes wrong. I think that it's kind of crazy to put that level of pressure on someone to have liability insurance because they're at an external cost. Why should a security leader be at a cost to them if they go into another organization that doesn't buy into security? I think that's absolute madness. Like you mentioned Uber. Uber have historically been a toxic company. It's fact, right? The TV show, was it Super Pumped with Joseph Gordon-Levitt? Nailed it right down. But they have historically been toxic when it comes to reporting on things. They had historic issues that seems to follow and travel over. Obviously, the CISO there was put in a position where maybe they didn't feel there was a reporting line or a whistleblower approach. Things kind of blew up, and then subsequently the SEC went after them. And you're right, why should the SEC go after a person when they're being pressured or threatened, or maybe their livelihood has been put at risk? For example, if you tell people or go public about a breach, then we'll take legal action against you, or there's a clause in your contract, or we're going to, I don't know, get rid of you, then you can't pay your mortgage and you can't feed your family. That pressure element is an absolute joke. And you're right, there isn't that degree of respect where I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the IT type stuff, where people just assume or have maybe a perspective on it that it's just like, they'll just take the flak. People forget that at C-level or people that are running a company or leadership teams, whatever it may be, they are responsible. They have a duty of care for their employees. Sometimes they need to just be, their head needs to be shook to remind them. But, these things like, I'm seeing cases in Europe where, CEOs are they're getting a fine and then they're fleeing the country. Rather than just go, listen, we got it wrong, we'll fix it. Okay, it's a 2-3 million euro fine. Why are people leaving the country, fleeing to like Romania or wherever it is? And it's like, this is just like, I'm reading these stories. Obviously, these are very, very small companies I'm talking about. I won't name them, right? Because obviously litigation is ongoing. The difference with me talking about Uber is the case has been settled. But it's like, that sort of stuff is just absolute madness. And then we flip it on the other side. Not that we're trying to scare people from working from the industry. It's the most supportive and collective industry. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Do we need more gender balance? Absolutely. Do we need more in terms of, people's civil liberties, their rights, when it comes to race? All these things are slowly changing in the industry. In fact, it's getting better. Yes, it's slow, it's not as progressive, but that's where, when you're in this kind of journey, you build that resilience, right? Where obviously you get to the very top of the cybersecurity echelon, and then it's like you need to have that mental toughness, and that only comes through navigating the political waters when you're in leadership positions, helping an organization understand where they're going, and be a partner, help security scale rather than be a blocker, and that way things become easier. It's like no one's got it figured out. Every leader I've ever spoke with says the same thing. It comes down to picking your battles and making sure things don't blow up in your face, but also taking care of yourself is so important. It's not until you get to maybe you have a family then you realize like this is tiring. But then on the other side, you get to mentor people, you get to build great relationships, you get to see those light bulb moments in folk, or you get to achieve things, you get to roll out amazing technologies. Maybe the adrenaline comes when you're dealing with a cyber attack or whatever it may be, and then you're truly achieving something in your industry, or you're helping break down barriers for other people. And that's what the most important thing is. So it's a double-edged sword. I won't label the point. I've kind of went on one or two tangents as I do on this podcast, but I think it's super important. And again, surround yourself with as many cyber friends as you can. That way you can talk about things offline, you can rant, you can get support, and ultimately it's why we have people like yourself, Max, to share your experiences and and share your leadership insight, because it's super important for people to learn from. So, but yeah, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think last thing I'll probably leave with is like you just said, if the SEC came to you, like you'd say what you'd say, well, but I think they'd gone to, like we were saying about the SolarWinds case.
Yeah.
They'd gone to Mr. Brown and said that, you know, you didn't, we're coming to you because you didn't tell us anything about your CEO that we wanted to know, kind of thing. We wanted you to report X, Y, and Z. And it's almost like he's obviously in the position of, well, I'm committing career suicide. Why would I do that? And it's literally the expectation is crazy for me that is out there. It's just like, people aren't going to do that. They're in careers. They've worked really hard to get to where you don't get to these positions by accident. And that he's still trying to obviously make things right. So it's just, to me, it's just as crazy. There is obviously not every company is like this as well. I don't want to put people off this. There is companies that are actually really good in terms of supporting you, and I'm sure SolarWinds are supporting Tim Brown. So I don't think that's the thing here, but I think there is companies that are like, for where I'm at, for example, Bionical. The culture is really, really good. It's very, very open, and it's a place where you can communicate with, like, if I need to communicate with my seniors, it's not too difficult for me to go and speak to someone in my C-suite. It's a very good culture, but I do think in the future, if at some point you move on, you have to be really, really wary, because it does seem at the moment there is, like we've already said, it is a double-edged sword. So yeah.
I think that's a really good point, is be cautious, right? Ask the fundamental questions. You know, it's like, you know, say you were leaving tomorrow and, you know, you're in an interview, and if you're asking them, you know, what's their culture like, is obviously an important thing. Do your research on them. Have they had any breaches? Have they had anyone leave the organization? Have they had a complete clear out? You know, these things are super important. And also ask them things about their cyber capability. You know, like, how many cyber attacks do you get a week? If nobody on these calls can answer it, that's a red flag for me. That's a huge indicator. Or you say, you know, what's the security budget? You know, what does it look like? What does the investment look like from the C-level? If people can't answer that, or they're like, well, you know, we'll need to figure that out when you're in the role, things start to smell a bit on that front. If they're like, this is our commitment to security, here is all this stuff listed. We have our trust center, we have our trust page, we have all these things. This is ingrained in our culture. Here's an example of company onboarding for an employee. That's when you start to relax, the anxiety goes, because you know, you never know what you're walking into. But at the same point, you could walk into a culture where every single person is like, I want to be a security champion. This is super important to us, you know, and that's the most amazing thing. And again, that's what makes security so amazing as well. It's a roulette, you know, in everything you do. And that's what brings the challenge and makes things quite exciting. And, you know, it's like, I think if anything, if people can take away from this is, you know, so do your research, you know, build mental fortitude, have key allies across wherever you're going, because you're going to need that support mechanism throughout your entire career. So on that note, I'm going to stop waffling. I think I've kind of went on complete tangents. But yeah, I'm interested on the comments and feedback from people. And again, I'd like to thank Max for being our guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Max. And yeah, everyone, you know what to do. Like, sub, watch, share, subscribe, whatever, all the terminology that comes with YouTube. Listen at me, I sound like I'm far too old for this game. But anyway, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Theo.